Welcome to today's deep dive. I'm your host, and we are unpacking something really fascinating for you today.
And I'm your resident expert. I've got to say, I am really looking forward to getting into this source material with you.
Yeah, it's a great one. So to start us off, I want you, the listener, to just picture this. You're in a room, right? And the person sitting across from you is a teenager in absolute, just overwhelming distress.
Oh, wow. Yeah, the air is just thick with tension in a moment like that.
Exactly. The clock on the wall sounds like a hammer dropping every single second. Everything in this student is either completely shutting down, going totally rigid and silent, or it's chaotically spilling over into anger and panic.
Right.
And every instinct you have, especially as a professional who's literally paid to keep people safe, but, really just as a human being, is screaming at you to fix it.
Yes. To just step in, grab the reins, ask direct questions, and take control immediately.
Right. Because that's what we do.
We are entirely wired to manage the crisis.
Yeah.
I mean, the adult brain in that scenario just wants to get the facts, establish a timeline, and resolve the problem so everyone can stop feeling so incredibly uncomfortable.
But what if the absolute best thing you could do in that moment wasn't taking over at all?
Right, which is so counterintuitive.
Completely. What if a school safety professional acted exactly like a midwife in a delivery room? That is the core premise of our deep dive today.
It is. We are looking at a document titled Series 3, What a DSL Can Learn From a Midwife.
And just to set the context real quick, a DSL is a designated safeguarding lead. So this is the point person in the school environment who steps in when a student is in a vulnerable, highly distressing situation involving their safety.
Right. They are the ones dealing with actively unfolding crises. And the author of this document draws this direct, incredibly detailed comparison between that school safeguarding professional and a midwife.
Which is such a striking comparison.
It really is. Because midwives work in moments where emotions are at their absolute peak, right?
Yeah.
Communication from the person in distress is, well, it's completely imperfect, and vulnerability is absolute. But midwives do not rush the biological process. They don't take over unnecessarily just to alleviate their own anxiety.
But they also don't ignore the distress.
Right, exactly. They stay present, they read the room meticulously, and they respond at exactly the right moment.
So our blueprint for this deep dive is to explore exactly how this midwife principle translates into the unpredictable world of student safeguarding.
We'll look at why professional presence is an active tool, the dangers of rushing trust, and crucially, where this analogy completely breaks down in reality.
Let's jump into that first part.
Yeah.
The document establishes that a midwife doesn't just barge in and take over. They practice this profound active presence.
Yes, the source text is very clear on this. A midwife's true power doesn't solely lie in the medical interventions they might eventually perform. It actually lies in their presence, their calm, and their absolute reliability in the room.
So doing the DSL translation of that, safeguarding presence means being available, being deeply attentive, and just remaining emotionally steady when the student's world feels like it's collapsing.
Precisely. That steady presence is the tool.
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate here. I hear active presence, but let's test that in the real world.
Let's do it.
If I'm a principal evaluating a DSL and I walk by their office and just see them sitting quietly with a distressed kid, it looks like they're doing absolutely nothing.
It does look like that from the outside, yeah.
Right. How do they justify that?
Right.
For someone who is highly action-oriented, being told that your job is just sitting with a student without rushing sounds uncomfortably passive. Like you aren't doing your job.
The source text actually anticipates this. It calls this a strategic reframe, and it is explicit that presence is not passive. It is an actively deployed safeguarding tool.
Makes me think of like being an anchor in a storm.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Right. An anchor doesn't stop the wind. It doesn't calm the waves.
Yeah.
But it works because it digs into the seabed. It is heavy and unmoving.
Yes.
And crucially, it allows the boat to ride out the waves safely on a flexible chain, rather than being rigidly tied to a concrete dock where it would just be smashed to pieces by the force of the water.
That is a perfect analogy, yes. And holding that anchor position, digging into the seabed while the storm rages around you is exhausting, deliberate work.
It takes so much energy to just be still in the face of panic.
It really does. Because a midwife in a delivery room is constantly reading the unsaid. They're monitoring the mother's breathing, analyzing subtle shifts in muscle tension, picking up on microscopic physical cues.
Trying to see where they are in the process.
Exactly. For a DSL, this means recognizing that students in trauma rarely have the capacity to explain what is wrong. They don't just sit down in a chair and hand you an itemized chronological list of their traumas.
So if they aren't speaking clearly, we're saying, I am experiencing neglect at home, my assumption is that a DSL is looking for the obvious red flags, right?
Like what?
Like falling grades, getting into fights, skipping class.
Sometimes, yeah. But often, it's much more subtle, and it's heavily rooted in the immediate interpersonal dynamic in that room.
Interesting.
The text gives specific examples of what this translation looks like. A DSL must learn to read withdrawal instead of waiting for a clear disclosure.
Wow, okay.
They have to interpret irritability instead of expecting a calm, rational explanation of the problem. They have to analyze silence instead of demanding clarity.
That reframes the entire interaction. I mean, if a student is sitting in my office snapping at me every time I ask a question, the procedural, rule-enforcing response is to discipline them for disrespect.
Which happens all the time.
Right. But the midwife response is to recognize that the irritability is the distress manifesting. The irritability is the symptom, not the core problem. If I'm busy being offended by their tone or frantically trying to manage their behavior, I am completely blind to the unsaid signals.
Which is exactly why rushing to fix the behavior fails.
Yeah.
If you aren't anchored and actively present, you will write off that irritability as just bad behavior and miss the safeguarding crisis entirely.
You end up punishing the child for the very distress you're supposed to be safeguarding them from.
Precisely.
But, okay, if I'm actively observing this silence or enduring this irritability, I'm stuck waiting. And in a school, waiting feels like a luxury we just don't have.
Time is always the enemy in a school schedule.
Yeah. There are bells ringing, classes to get back to, parents to call. How long do I wait before patience becomes negligence?
That is the big question, and the source material connects this directly to the pacing of vulnerability. Think about the midwife principle again.
Okay.
Birth has its own biological timing. It cannot be forced without introducing massive physical risk to the mother and the child.
You can't just put it on a schedule.
Right. It requires immense, sometimes agonizing patience from the professionals in the room. When we translate that to safeguarding, processes like disclosure, trust building, and emotional processing require that exact same patience.
So we have to adjust our own internal clock to match theirs.
Yes. The text calls for a fundamental leadership shift. It warns us that rushing a safeguarding moment can backfire terribly.
Because it breaks the trust.
If you push too hard, if you demand they tell you what happened right this second because you have a meeting in 10 minutes, you shut down communication entirely.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You actively increase the student's distress, and you shatter whatever fragile trust was beginning to form. The goal is to deliberately allow space and avoid pushing for immediate clarity.
You really have to respect the emotional pacing of the individual sitting in front of you.
You do.
But I'm still wrestling with the practical application of this, though. We are talking about student safety. Let's say I'm that DSL, and I suspect a student is being physically harmed outside of school.
Okay, high-risk scenario.
Right. The student is in my office, completely shut down, staring at the floor. How do I balance respecting their emotional pacing with the very real, very urgent need to intervene if they are in actual danger?
It's a huge tension.
Because I can't just sit there patiently for 3 hours if they might go home to an abuser at 3 p.m.,
And you shouldn't. The text anticipates this exact tension. The answer lies in the concept of thresholds.
Thresholds. Okay, unpack that.
The midwife doesn't just sit there passively smiling no matter what happens, right? They know exactly when to step in, when to step back, and when to escalate to emergency medical procedures.
So you're constantly evaluating the situation against safety thresholds.
Exactly. For DSL, safeguarding requires profound professional judgment about timing.
So it's a razor's edge. Acting too early because of my own anxiety might cause the student to panic and clam up forever.
Yes.
But acting too late because I am trying too hard to be a patient passive presence crosses the line into negligence.
The priority, as the text states, is always safety, not control. You are monitoring closely and acting only when specific safety thresholds are met.
So the ticking clock does matter, but only in relation to risk.
Right. If the clock strikes 2:30 p.m. and the student hasn't disclosed, but you have reasonable grounds to believe they are in danger, the threshold for intervention is met. You act.
You make the call.
You involve the authorities or parents, But you do it because safety demands it, not because you lost patience with the student's silence. The goal is a safe outcome, not controlling the narrative to make the adults in the room feel better.
That is such a crucial distinction. Okay, let's follow that thread. The intervention happens. The threshold is met. The DSL steps in. The necessary calls are made, and the immediate crisis passes.
The storm subsides.
Exactly. But just as the birth of a child isn't the end of a midwife's job, the safeguarding moment is really only the beginning.
Oh, absolutely. The text emphasizes that care does not end at the moment of intervention. There is ongoing monitoring, support, and a very long road to recovery.
Because the trauma doesn't just vanish once the secret is out.
No, not at all. The text notes that for students, the impact of trauma continues long after the initial disclosure or the immediate crisis intervention. The safeguarding moment is rarely the end of the story.
It's usually just the beginning of constructing a long-term support structure around that individual.
Exactly.
And this post-crisis reality is exactly where the source introduces what it calls the honest bit.
My favorite part of the document?
Right. Because as beautiful and thought-provoking as the midwife comparison is, a high school is not a maternity ward.
Definitely not.
Birth is a biological guarantee. It is going to happen one way or another. A teenager's behavioral crisis, on the other hand, is completely unpredictable and doesn't follow a set timeline.
It is vital to recognize the limits of any metaphor. And the source material provides a brilliant table detailing exactly where the analogy breaks down.
What are the main differences?
Well, what DSLs must absolutely not take from the midwife comparison is the dangerous idea that safeguarding is a natural process that will just resolve itself if you wait long enough.
Because it won't.
It won't. It requires highly structured systems. Furthermore, unlike a biological process that moves in one direction, trauma and behavior can regress, spiral, or stall completely.
Let's break down that contrast explicitly for the listener. On one side, you have the midwife. They are supporting a natural biological progression.
Yes.
They're moving through somewhat predictable stages of labor, and they are working within a very focused context, usually a single room, dedicated entirely to this one event with one clear goal.
And on the other side, you have the DSL. They are not supporting a natural process. They are actively managing safeguarding risk.
Totally different.
Instead of biological progression, they are dealing with the messy, nonlinear reality of complex human behavior. Instead of predictable stages, they face highly variable situations that can change by the minute.
Yeah, and rather than a focused, isolated context like a delivery room, they are operating in a multi-layered, chaotic environment.
A school with hundreds or thousands of other students.
The bells ringing, exams happening, peer dynamics, social media conflicts, which means you can't just rely on individual good vibes and patience. You need an infrastructure.
You need systems in place.
So how do you scale this? Having acknowledged the complex, unpredictable environment of a school, how on earth do we take this highly individualized, one-on-one midwife mindset and scale it across an entire institution's staff?
Well, that brings us to the leadership layer of the text, building safeguarding through presence on an institutional scale.
Right.
The author poses a fantastic system-level question. They ask, when students are at their most vulnerable, do your staff know how to be present, or are they just procedural?
Just procedural.
Wow.
That is the default for so many organizations when things get scary.
It really is.
We hide behind checklists, incident report forms, and rigid protocols because it feels safer for the adults. We treat a traumatized student like a liability to be managed rather than a human to be supported.
And a truly strong safeguarding culture demands that leadership becomes deeply human. The source outlines the application of this to pastoral systems through 3 distinct layers.
Wait, before we go further into the layers, when we talk about a pastoral system in a school context, what exactly are we looking at? Is that just the guidance counselors, or are we talking about the teachers themselves?
It is the entire ecosystem of care within the school.
Okay.
It includes the specialized staff like counselors and DSLs, but it fundamentally relies on the teachers, the coaches, the front office staff, and the administration. It's the overarching structure designed to support the personal, social, and emotional well-being of the students, not just their academic progress.
That makes sense. So to build this midwife presence into that massive ecosystem, the text starts with the first layer, which is foundations.
Foundations are about establishing basic emotional safety long before a crisis ever occurs.
Getting ahead of it.
Yeah. It's ensuring there is a trusted adult presence available to the students. A student isn't going to suddenly drop their guard in the middle of a crisis with a DSL they've never met in a school that historically only cares about their test scores.
Of course not. The foundation of safety has to be built into the everyday culture.
Exactly.
And the second layer is developmental pathways, or what the text calls well-being literacy. Explain how a school actually does this. Is it just teaching kids emotional vocabulary in homeroom?
It is a two-way street. Yes, part of it is equipping students with the vocabulary and the emotional tools to actually express their vulnerability.
Teaching them the difference between feeling angry and feeling unsafe so they have the words to advocate for themselves when the storm passes.
Precisely. But simultaneously, and perhaps more importantly, it means training the entire staff to accurately interpret distress.
Reading the unsaid, like we discussed earlier.
Yes. Training a math teacher to recognize that a student putting their head down on the desk every day isn't necessarily defiance or laziness.
Right, it might be a massive red flag for exhaustion due to a chaotic home life.
Exactly. It's giving the adults the literacy to read the behavior as communication.
Which brings us to the final layer, leadership itself, human-centered safeguarding.
And this is the hardest part. It is finding that incredibly delicate tightrope walk balance between necessary, rigorous, legally mandated processes and skilled, empathetic presence.
Because you can't abandon the protocols. The protocols keep kids from falling through the cracks.
You absolutely need them.
But if the protocols are executed without humanity, they just traumatize the kid further. It requires a staff that is fluent in the legal requirements, but who apply those requirements with the patience and observation of a midwife.
It requires leaders who evaluate their staff not just on how quickly they filled out the incident report, but on how well they held that anchor position in the storm.
That is powerful. So if we synthesize everything we've unpacked from this text, the core lesson for you, our listener, is this. In the most intense moments of human vulnerability, true support is never rushed.
No, it isn't.
It isn't forced. It doesn't loudly take over the room to make the professional feel powerful or capable. It is patient, it is intensely attentive, and it is entirely centered on the safety and the dignity of the individual in crisis.
Beautifully said. And the source leaves us with a profound final reflection and a question to carry forward.
Let's hear it.
It reminds us that some of the most important transformative moments in life cannot be controlled. They can only be safely supported through. And the ultimate question it asks every safeguarding professional to ask themselves is this. In safeguarding moments of vulnerability, am I trying to control the situation, or am I present enough to support it safely?
I love that. And I want to leave you, the listener, with one final thought that builds on everything we've explored today.
Please do.
The applications of this document go far beyond a school environment. If we can train ourselves to understand this kind of midwife presence in high-stakes professional safeguarding, imagine how applying that same active, patient presence could transform our own personal relationships.
Oh, that's a really interesting point.
Right. Think about the next time a friend, a partner, or a family member is quietly distressed or unfairly irritable or totally withdrawn. What would happen if we stopped taking it personally?
Yeah.
What would happen if we stopped frantically trying to fix their problem with unsolicited advice and instead just became their anchor, digging in, staying present, and simply sitting with them in the storm until they are ready to speak?
It completely shifts the entire dynamic from managing a problem to facilitating true human connection.
It really does. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we'll see you next time as we continue to learn together.